Welcome to the Groundwork show, where we dive into the leaders building the most interesting ecosystem businesses in the world. On this episode, I have Hugh Durkin joining me, and Hugh has an incredible experience building partner programs and app platforms and marketplaces at companies like HubSpot, Facebook, Intercom, and now he's on his own entrepreneurial journey as well. And so I'm really excited for you all to listen into this session. It's super interesting. Hugh, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so the last 10 years plus of my career has been in kind of platform companies, kind of technology companies you've likely heard of, the likes of Facebook, Intercom, HubSpot, Zalando. Before that, I was a founder for about 8 years, which is fun as well. But also from that, I kind of experienced from a partner perspective what it was like to deal with larger platforms. Like I was a partner of Google, for example, in the earlier days. So yeah, that's been my kind of high level career. Kind of within that, Facebook early on, what was the preferred marketing developer program team that became Facebook marketing partners. It's now Meta Business Partners, I think. Early-ish Intercom, I think there were like 90 or so people there, spun up a lot of their platform efforts in the beginning, like the first version of their app store, the first developer program, that kind of thing. Then, yeah, Zalando, bit of data science, product management, and then HubSpot, basically spent 4 years there. I took on what was then called the Connect Partner Program and helped grow that into what is today the App Partner Program. So that was a fun journey. It was like 150 apps and integrations at the beginning. I think it was about 1,200 apps and integrations in the app marketplace by the time I left. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Amazing. Yeah, and lots that we can dig into, as I mentioned before. One of the things I would like to start with, having been a founder who's interested in partnerships, like navigating that, I think, like there's kind of like two categories of founders when it comes to partnerships. There is like, hey, instinctively this just makes sense. Like I might not necessarily even call it partnerships. It's just like, hey, this is like, this naturally makes sense as how like I'm going to navigate my business. It's like I run into these people all the time. Like it just makes sense. And then there is like the folks where it just makes no sense, and it's like, hey, we are going to spend all of our money on marketing and whatever else to try and acquire customers. And like it sounds like for you, you were kind of in that first bucket where it's like, hey, like this kind of makes sense, and you had some partnerships in your earlier companies. Like for partnerships people who are encountering founders in that second bucket, where it's like, hey, it seems like my CEO or founder doesn't get why this is important. Like they've hired me still, but they don't get why this is important. Like, what would you recommend they should do to approach that conversation? Because obviously, they're going to be really climbing up a mountain otherwise.
Yeah, I think part of it comes from founders are, I think, by their very nature, quite protective of what they're building, and also sometimes can be kind of suspicious as well with that too. So you've got an idea, you want to turn it into a business, you want to grow it, and you're kind of fearful on one hand that someone might steal your idea or some of your secret sauce, or on the other hand, you're kind of you don't want to be distracted by too many things as well, I guess. And I understand that, like as a founder back in the earlier days, when I was a premium publisher. Well, I ended up being a premium publisher in their AdSense world. So I ended up like with a partner manager and all that kind of stuff. But I still remember getting that phone call from somebody in Google, and I thought I'd done something wrong at the time. So I used to own a price comparison website, and it was big, a lot of traffic, and a lot of that traffic came from Google. And I wasn't doing anything shady to get the traffic, but you always hear about these updates. Back then Panda was one of them where like loads of sites got wiped, and I remember getting the call, and it was somebody from Google, and I was like, oh god, what's happened? But actually what it was they had seen the growth in the AdSense account that we had, and they wanted to basically offer us a bunch of stuff to play with and earn even more money from, which is amazing. But that initial feeling of, oh my god, big platform reaching out to me, what have I done wrong, is kind of, I think, part of why some founders are fearful maybe of working with larger companies. I think they just don't understand that a lot of these platforms couldn't grow without them. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is, um, I guess partnerships in general. especially if you're a founder and you're a smaller company, like partnerships are usually one of the most efficient ways to acquire new customers. And part of that is if you're partnering with, even a company your own size, but especially with a larger platform, they're likely to have like at least the same number of customers as you, if not more, and in some cases, many, many, many more. And just the opportunity to sort of be part of that world and be part of that environment and like tap into that existing customer base that's probably taken them years to build is a huge opportunity. So that's generally kind of the advice I'd give to folks. Just be open minded, be kind of trust, that when these platforms reach out to you, it's with good intent, basically, and don't be fearful of it. But also kind of remember that they have a bunch of customers that could be your customers pretty soon if you just engage with them in the right way.
That's awesome. Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned, when you were talking about founders potentially seeing it as a distraction, and I think
Yeah.
that that's a really good one, because I think a lot of the time, I don't think necessarily. Sometimes it's like, hey, this is just a distraction. This is not important. Or sometimes it's like, hey, I hired you to think about that, so I can think about this. It's like we, that's something that's like almost separate from the company and the customer. Rather than, hey, like, it's the company and the customer and like the partner are the ones together, and like we're the company, rather than rather than it's us and the customer together and the partner's the third party. And I think, yeah, like a lot of founders can see partnerships as a distraction, or I think we're guilty in the partnership space of like coming out of left field, because you're like, for instance, if you're the person at your company who's working with Google on all of this like cutting edge new functionality, and they're like, hey, like there's this new thing, there's that new thing, all of this crazy stuff that's coming out, and then like the rest of the team are like, yeah, but we just use this AdSense. They're like, why are you talking to me about that? It's like, this is not contextually relevant to like what I'm doing in my day-to-day role. It can seem like a distraction, even though it's like, hey, 6 months from now or 3 months from now, we're going to really need to. It is going to be a day job, and we're going to need to have switched gears. Like, how does someone navigate that, where they can kind of like have empathy for the founder, where like, hey, maybe this is like short term a little bit of a distraction, but it's like long term strategic, or yeah, like what would be your recommendations?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's like money talks ultimately. And I guess especially if you're an earlier stage founder, you're going to be really focused on getting money in the door as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you're a really good founder, you're going to have to think long term as well, right? And partnerships in general, the magic doesn't happen overnight. We kind of all know that, but when it does happen, it happens like well over the long term. So I think one thing that could be done to kind of maybe overcome that, is this a distraction or not, question, is to just, depending on the ecosystem you're working with or the partner you're working with, just point to other examples of companies that have done something similar to what you're trying to do and have been successful. You can choose big ones. You can choose like Klaviyo, for example, in the Shopify's ecosystem. That's a big one. Or you could choose, even HubSpot, for example, have a lot of case studies now where they talk about, various different partners from different backgrounds, building different things, all seeing similar types of success in that ecosystem. So I think if you can kind of paint that picture of, if we put, a small percentage of our time into this today to just get something up and running, even just conversations, long term that can lead to kind of nice incremental growth as well. Yeah, and like I said, like part of it is just the efficiency conversation,
Yeah.
like especially as you grow a company, kind of by its nature, it often can become more and more inefficient to acquire new customers. Sometimes you can kind of hit a critical mass, I guess, of customers in your network, for example, or in the different companies that you're already partnered with. Yeah, and just kind of looking into new worlds and seeing what there's new distribution opportunities is just a healthy thing to do, even if it might take 6 months to a year to get up and running and see some results. There's no harm in putting the work in today.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it. I can see where they come from in terms of it maybe sounding like a distraction or being a distraction, but ultimately, like I said, money talks, even money that will come in the future.
Yeah, I think part of the challenges that folks run into at the moment, I really like what you were talking about efficiency, and I do think, and I think in the past, and I'm going to take a leap here, so I might be completely wrong, but I am guessing that when you were building your businesses in Dublin, like you were operating in like a resource scarce environment where like efficiency was important because you don't have like unlimited funding to be able to acquire customers in any way, any margin. Basically, is that fair to assume?
Yeah, oh, completely. Yeah.
Yeah, so whereas like in 2021 VCs deployed like more than $250 billion into SaaS, into tech startups, and so I think that they're basically like from 2015 to 2021, founders basically didn't have to operate in a resource scarce environment because like the capital was so abundant, and so like people didn't care about efficiency for a while. And so like if you're a partnership leader and you're like, hey, I can't generate all of your leads, maybe can only generate like 30-40% of them, but they're going to be really profitable and really efficient, and it's like, hey, it might be 30% of your leads, but it's going to be like 80% of our profits. And then the founder's like, well, I don't really give a about profits, like I don't really care about efficiency, I want the volume of the leads. It's hard to have that efficiency conversation. And I think I'm quite hopeful that like in this kind of updated operating environment that we're in now over the last like 2-3 years, that founders are actually starting to pay attention to efficiency again. And it's like, oh, actually, this is an incredibly smart way for me to operate a company.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And like one of the biggest examples I can think of something being seen as a distraction, but then actually being ultimately very efficient at a time when people had to be super careful was like I joined Facebook in 2012. So things were still kind of, the momentum was still building after 2008. Like people were still being super cautious about where they spent their time and where their budgets. And Facebook was a super new channel at the time. Like we were convinced, we were still trying to convince people to spend money with us. Like we had no mobile products when I joined. We had not really any direct response products at all. Agencies were suspicious, and there was a bunch of, at the same time, Google was making a ton of money from search, and some of the partners that we had to kind of convince to come on the journey were those products, those ad tech products that were focused on Google. We had to kind of convince them that add in Facebook and it's going to be good for you. And it took a lot of work and a lot of conversations and a lot of faith on both sides. But ultimately, that ended up growing their business and our business at the same time. And then, the same thing applied, when Twitter came along with their APIs and Pinterest and all the rest of them, TikTok, they could, like, the momentum kind of built. But that early stage, especially for those folks that were focused on Google, like just only on Google, like just bidding on keywords and search, like that was a huge business for them. And Facebook was this brand new distraction. We were releasing new ad products all the time and deprecating some of them as quickly as we built them, which was kind of jarring, and not a great partner experience in some ways. But in the end, it actually worked out very, very well for everyone involved. So I think that's one big example of like where, even at that early stage, and even in a very resource constrained environment, like I said, 2012 was not, 2020
Yeah.
example in terms of like
Yeah.
the money sloshing around. Yeah, it was a long term bet, and the folks that jumped on board did very well out of it.
Amazing. So I want to continue on that thread actually and talk a little bit about that time at Facebook, because I think what an amazing moment in time to be at. Just like, hey, already a big company, but really like transforming from a social network company to like a just one of the best businesses on the planet, basically, like from like a economical standpoint. So what an incredible journey, and also like what an incredible type of like category of partnerships to be working on at that company at the time as well. Just absolutely fascinating. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more, Liz. Like I would just love to unpack that experience a little bit more, like specifically what you were working on there and how it looked, and would love to dig in.
Yeah, definitely. Like I got very lucky, basically getting that job. When I did, it was on the early marketing API team. In 2012, I think I joined June 2012, just after the IPO. And yeah, like typical Facebook, actually, when I was interviewing, it was for the marketing API team. And then when I joined, it was actually the preferred marketing developer program team. And that happened because there was a different program called the PDC program, which was the Preferred Developer Consultants program, which was a bunch of service providers and kind of app builders. And it was a totally different program run by somebody else, completely different. And then the Marketing API program was set up by John Yee. And in their wisdom, they decided to merge them into what we call the PMD, the Preferred Marketing Developer Program. So that was super interesting. Like we were honestly, we were just kind of figuring it all out as we went. Like everyone on Facebook was just figuring out everything as we went. Like it was a totally new type of platform that we were building. There was totally new different types of ad products. Like I said, we would release new ones as fast as we deprecate old ones. Like I remember one example where I don't know if you remember graph search was like a thing. There was like a sponsored search product that kind of arrived on the scene and disappeared like within 6 months or something. This kind of you could bid on keywords and all that kind of stuff. So it was super interesting, but it all moved really quickly, and I don't think I've ever seen numbers as big since on a dashboard, either in terms of like the actual numbers, but also how quickly they were growing. And it was amazing. Like we'd full access. Like it was a super transparent sort of culture in the company. Nobody hid anything from anyone. And we could kind of see, across all our partners, just how well things were doing, and it was an incredible time. Yeah, but we were literally learning as we went. We made so many mistakes, but also, yeah, I think it helped me learn a lot in a very short space of time.
Yeah, it's awesome. And like, the in the same way that, Google has search and like GCP and Gmail or whatever, and for Facebook at the time, Facebook has the social network, and but like like for Google, the business is the ads, right? And for Facebook, the business is becoming the ads, and like and that is like the business. Did you like working on these like key partnerships on what was emerging as like a really important piece of the whole company? Was it clear internally that like, hey, this is the priority for the company, like this is like top priority for the business, or was it still like was partnerships and like the ad business and everything else still like second fiddle to the social network, I guess?
Yeah, I think the short answer is at the time, kind of, yeah, yeah. It was super interesting. It was so the marketing API program only came about because John Yee, who kind of set it up, was an account manager, and he was dealing with clients all the time, and they were the ones who basically said to him and said to Facebook, "Oh, we'd like to buy ads programmatically." Like when I joined, like so much of the ad buying was people faxing in IOs and stuff. Like it was like from the old world. And even though there was like an interface for SMB kind of advertisers, it was super underinvested. Like I think Power Editor at the time, which was a power user tool, had like half an engineer's time in it or something. Like it was really like super underinvested. So yeah, like in the early days, we definitely had to kind of beat the drum a lot and trying to elevate the partnerships that we had. So like early on, like one of them that I managed when I joined was the one with Salesforce, who were building like a marketing cloud at the time, just like, every other company, or Oracle were building a marketing cloud. I managed a relationship with Experian at the time, who acquired a social ad tech company as well. And yeah, I think a lot of what we did in the early days was internally, I think, to leadership, but also across, the sales teams as well, was just sort of try and educate them on not just this ecosystem and how it was growing, but actually how it was already feeding into growing the business. So we started to get really strong evidence early on that advertisers, in gaming, for example, and ecom, that bought through these tools got way better ROI on their Facebook dollar investments, and that kind of helped tell the story. But for sure, like in the early days, we were like, I think a lot of partnerships teams, honestly, and a lot of companies in the early days, we were kind of on the side. Like leadership knew we should exist. They weren't exactly sure why. Customers told them it was great. And it was really when we started to get momentum and get some kind of data in and prove the value of what we were doing that we, started to dial up the investment dialed up. I think when I joined the PMD team, it was like 7 or 8 people or something, and by the time I left, it was like 100 or something in the group.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for people listening, for context, like I pulled up some numbers, and I think the ad revenue for Facebook at the end of 2012, like Q4 2012, was about like a little bit over $1 billion, and like in Q3 2013, it went from like one and a half to like $3 billion. It's like grew 50% quarter over quarter, and then like today the ad revenue is like $35 billion or something. It's like 30x in a few in a few years, and so that business is like grown astronomically. And even back then, 85% of the revenue, like that $1 billion represented like 85% of the revenue. So it's like the vast majority of the company's business, but it's like just grown like astronomically since, which is
Yeah,
really, really cool.
yeah. Oh, and it was insane even just to see the mobile revenue go from basically $0 to like I think it was like 60 or something percent within like a year. That wasn't like that was an incredible period, that 2012 to 2013 period,
Oh,
when Zuck was basically just like, we've IPO'd, all is well, but we've all of the investment community everywhere in the world is looking at how we're doing on mobile, and
yeah,
we got to fix it. And it was just a really super quick turnaround. And again, like our partners helped us get there. Like, so a lot of what the likes of Salesforce would have done is embed different ad buying flows in their products to sort of help make it easier for advertisers just to switch on mobile. And that really had a huge effect, to the point that, yeah, I think around the time that I left, 2015, late 2015, I think like 30 something plus percent of all Facebook ads were bought via our partners, basically. And like that was incredible, because a few years before it was basically zero. But yeah, the partners really helped, not just to drive revenue growth, but to drive the right kind of revenue growth as well, and help with that pivot to mobile, which was super important.
amazing. And so tell me more, because I'm not as familiar with this space. So tell me more about how that partnership with Salesforce would have worked in a bit more detail. Just like who's the end user? Just yeah, break it down for me.
Yeah, so Salesforce were super interesting as a partner. So they bought, I think it was early 2012, maybe late 2011. They bought Buddy Media. And Buddy Media had just acquired a company called Brighter Option that were based in London. And Brighter Option was like a Facebook ad buying tool, basically. So I ended up working really closely with the Brighter Option team in London. That was they called it Buy Buddy, and then eventually, and then they called it Social.com in the end. They actually bought Social.com for who knows how much money. But yeah, I basically it was very much a product driven partnership. And we when we had QBRs, and we would talk about revenue as well, but so much of what we focused on was just customer value first and foremost. And the kind of pillars that I thought about this kind of stuff through then, or the kind of lenses that I thought through it then, and now are still the same. Like, first and foremost, we were all focused on just co-creating utility value for customers, and in their case, it was a lot of media agencies that were using BuyBuddy to buy ads on behalf of their clients. So we're really focused on like integrating quickly the right kind of ad products and making them buyable in the right way, super efficiently for these folks. And also kind of making sure that reporting was telling the right kind of story as well around the effectiveness of the ads. But yeah, that was always a starting point. It was always a product conversation first, utility value. How can we create more of that for customers, and kind of go from there? And then beyond that, the next pillar, like distribution value. So we always thought about in both directions. What could we do to bring new customers in both directions? So on our side, like, we deeply engage with the sales teams and the global agency teams, for example, at Facebook, and we would be advocating for partners like BuyBuddy, Salesforce, when conversations came up about programmatic ad buying. And similarly on their side, they would, if they started conversations with a larger brand, sometimes they'd bring them in to us to engage with the Facebook sales teams as well. So it was very much a mutual kind of partnership there, trying to help through the high quality product that we kind of built together, help with distribution on both sides and get each other customers. But then ultimately, yeah, what we measured in every QBR was revenue value. So that's the kind of build. It's like build the utility value first, make sure the product's really good. That unlocks distribution opportunity, and then from that comes the revenue afterwards. And yeah, that's generally how the relationship worked. Like I'd say at least 60% of our time in our conversations were product related, kind of helping them with bugs that they had using the APIs. Part of our team were an amazing group of folks, a solution engineering team at Facebook that were kind of spun up in tandem with us. And we worked really hand in hand with them to kind of help integrate Facebook into Salesforce's marketing cloud. And yeah, it was very much product focused, but also like ultimately revenue was the thing that we looked at day in, day out on both sides. Their revenue model was built around like a percentage of spend, typical ad tech model back then. So we were kind of mutually aligned in terms of our interest there.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting. And I could spend like another 3 hours just talking about going into more detail on this, but there's so much more that I want to talk about. So let's shift gears a little bit, because you then go and work at Intercom, and there you're building out App Store, partner program, developer hub. There's like a bunch of work that's going on there. And I'm assuming that they're bringing you in to work on that stuff, or like how did that work when you were hired at Intercom? Was it like, hey, we need to build out like a way to work with, like we want to build our ecosystem basically, or was it like, hey, we're going to bring in this really smart guy and then he's going to tell us what he's going to work on?
It was definitely not a smart guy, by the way. But it was definitely the former, and I think that's actually where we first connected. We've been connected for a while on LinkedIn, and I think we had a few threads. Optimizely were in that general orbit at the time, but yeah, it was very much. I think Intercom was like a 90-person company at the time. I'd overlapped at Facebook with Paul Adams, who's still their CPO, and he kind of pinged me a few times saying, hey, do you want to join? We'd like you to, and this is the kind of air quotes bit, launch a developer platform or help us launch a developer platform. And that can mean so many things.
Yeah.
What it meant for me was, I think week 2 when I joined, like I was in a lawyer's office getting like platform terms, like developer terms written up because none existed, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it ended up being a bit of everything. Like I wore, like most people in sort of partnerships roles, but especially with like a product slant on a partnerships role. I PM'd the strategic integrations that we built with like Shopify and Atlassian. We were one of four launch partners of Microsoft Teams, which was fun. So I think it was us, Asana, Hootsuite, and Zendesk. So kind of negotiating that partnership, but also product managing the integration itself was fun. And yeah, just kind of figuring out like what were the things we needed to build to actually legitimately say to the market, we are building a platform. Like the basic stuff, like developers.intercom.com. I think we spun that up in the first like 6 weeks or something after I joined. The App Store, first version of the App Store came after probably 9 months or something. And it was very much like figuring out, what do customers want and what are they asking for in terms of like integrations, but also API coverage as well. And also kind of figuring out like, did we have an ecosystem? Like,
Yeah.
was there already an ecosystem there? And did we need to kind of pull it all together into one place to put it for the customers? And that's kind of where the App Store came from. And what I learned pretty quickly just from digging into the data was we actually had a bunch of partners emerging around the periphery of Intercom that were super interested in building value with us, but we just didn't have any structures in place to sort of work with them in the right way. So yeah, a lot of the focus was early on, like trying to just organize that, figure out who was doing what, which value did it add for which types of customers, figuring out if they were aligned in terms of like the partnership with us. And then figuring out how we gave them a distribution opportunity in the product, like through the integrations hub that we built through the App Store. But it was basically, yeah, all of those hats worn at once. And I think that's the same. It was probably the same for you in Optimize as well. Early stage company, we need to do partnerships, we need to do integrations, figure it out.
Yeah. I think I was lucky at Optimizely because the company was just like very receptive. Like we had a real high ownership and agency culture. So like they were just like, oh, you want to do something, do it. Like, go and do it. Like I trust that you're smart, like trust, ownership. These are all like parts of the culture. And so it was like, okay, as long as you're going to be accountable for that thing, you can go and do it. And so like they kind of just let me run with whatever I wanted to do, but it wasn't like a, hey, we want to build a thing. Like it was just like, I get, well, if you want to do it, I guess go and do it. Like see what happens, which I was quite lucky with. Like for you, obviously, it sounded like, hey, they saw this as like a strategic investment, and like, what was the motivation for that? Was it like a, hey, like we see this as a way for us to like just plant the flag in and like be the middle of a ecosystem, or was it like a, hey, we want this to generate revenue or customer retention, or like what was the thinking behind, or like the expected ROI basically of hiring you in this investment?
Yeah, it was ultimately like their customers were telling them a bunch of different things. Well, either their customers or people who didn't become customers in the end. And the first thing was like, we need intercom. If intercom's going to be part of our stack, we need it to work with everything else that we already use. And that's kind of what unlocked the sort of API conversation, and getting that side of things kind of spun up quite quickly. Again, like money talks. If you've got a customer saying we're not going to pay you if you don't, create APIs for us to integrate with all our stuff, you go ahead and do it. And then there was a kind of a build from there when the API started to exist that did a bunch of different things around, conversations mostly in the beginning and contacts being moved around. Those same customers or different groups of customers would then tell us, actually, yeah, the APIs are fine and it's fine for us to have to do this kind of work, but we don't want to. We would like an integration with, Segment or whatever. And then we go ahead and build that. So it was very, very much, again, customer driven. And that's kind of what happened from Intercom side as well, in terms of like investing in this area. Like before I even joined Intercom, like after kind of I'd agreed to join, I think for the first 2 months, I just kept getting forwarded all these emails. And it was either emails from customers saying, we need this, and this being, different endpoints for whatever, or it was people asking for a specific integration. And then on the other side, there was a lot of other emails I was forwarded, which were partners, the likes of Segment or, Optimizely. I can't remember exactly who it was, but they were pinging Intercom to say that their customers wanted to use Intercom with what they built. How can we figure it out, kind of thing. So again, it was very much, I think the motivation from Intercom's perspective was, again, like customer value driven from the outset. And they were just literally just acting based on what they'd been hearing from the market. And the market was saying, we need this. We love what you're building, but it needs to work with everything else that we already have. And by the way, if you can do that, we'll pay you not just money, but probably more money over time. And that was the kind of main motivation.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm interested. So like I heard this great interview with Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, the other day, and they were asking him, hey, like, how do you maintain a strategic advantage over time? Like there are going to be a ton of other companies that do what they do. And he was basically saying, hey, like if you're ahead of the market, but you invest in the ecosystem, like even if people kind of catch up to your technology or they innovate other things over time, like they can't win your ecosystem away from you quickly. It's just incredibly difficult. And so you basically have this. He was like, I hate the word moat, but like you have a moat basically with the ecosystem you build. And I think that makes a ton of sense. And also that is like forward looking, right? Like you can respond to customers and it's like kind of backwards. Well, it's not backwards looking, it's still like progressive, right? But like you're responding to what customers are asking for rather than operating like ahead of the market, which is like the preferred place to be if it's possible, which is definitely what NVIDIA's done, right? Like they've been like extremely ahead of the market, like dangerously so, consistently, right? And so I've run into with this situation with like, where does the developer ecosystem live? Is this a product thing? Is this a partnerships thing? Is this like like a collaborative thing? Like where does this thing live? Because yeah, if it's a customer need, then it's definitely a product thing, right? It's all product work, but like if it's a customer need, then it's definitely a product thing. If it's like a forward looking, hey, it's not a customer need, but it's like something that we want to create a customer need around it over time. Often it's more of a BD motion than it is like a traditional product motion. Like based on your experience, like where do you think it makes sense for that stuff to live And then like, how do people play nice when, like everyone has opinions around it?
Yeah, that is the question of the year or the decade, probably in our world. Yeah, it's I've seen different versions of this play out really well. So, like Facebook, for example, we actually rolled up to revenue. We rolled up to a guy called David Fisher who ran all of kind of GMS, Global Marketing Solutions, it was called. But at the same time, our friends in solutions engineering who were part of the same org as us, there were a ton of engineers in that group, and they weren't just like helping customers integrate; they were actually building the APIs. They rolled up into that org as well, which I thought was interesting. So Facebook culturally is very engineering, product driven org or company anyway. That kind of trickles down from Zuck. So I think the whole company was a bit product driven, but we actually ultimately rolled up into revenue in that role. Intercom was obviously different. Like I reported up to the now CPO, and then like HubSpot, we rolled up in the earlier days when I joined up to a CSO, so strategy org you could call it. But I think recently enough, they actually moved into the product org, which is kind of interesting. So I think it depends, who should report where. I think depends on a bunch of different things. I think it depends on where you are with your partner motions. And what I mean by that is if most of what you're doing is sort of like alliances and kind of go to market partnerships, rolling up to a CRO makes a ton of sense. But if you start to move into that, technology partnerships worlds, building like a platform ecosystem, like a marketplace with a bunch of integrations, then I think it starts to make more sense to be part of a product org. And the reason why is, if you think about it in terms of like, again, customer value, every single product that integrates with yours or is like built on your platform is actually an extension of the product itself. And that's a kind of a different motion and a different way of thinking. And it also brings up different conversations around, data privacy, security. There's a lot more diligence you have to do there, especially at a certain scale to make that kind of stuff work. But I think when you move into that world where you've got basically more people that don't work for the company focused on building product value for the company or the platform, that's when I think it starts to make sense to at least move some of those types of partnerships into a product org rather than a revenue org. And maybe in that instance, some of the sort of alliances, the kind of go-to-market partnerships, maybe they sit, still with the CRO. But around that time, when you have that critical mass of people, more people outside the company building product value than live inside the company, that starts to feel to me at least like more of a reporting up to the CPO, the chief product officer kind of situation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had a great experience when I was working at Deal with, like our product org built our marketplace and like the first version of it, and they just built the marketplace because they instinctively felt like, hey, we should have like a marketplace to surface some of our partner perks or whatever, and that was like just a value machine for our partners because we sent so many leads to partners because of that marketplace. And so we had a bunch, there was a ton of like organic understanding of partnerships at the executive level. So like our CEO who's like driving a lot of the product strategy at Deal would just be like, hey, like we have to do this, we have to do the same thing with the CFO. It's like, hey, like these partners are super important to how we run the business. Like, are you crazy? Like, of course we have to build that thing. Like, go and build it. And so that we didn't run into issues because of that. I do feel like where this stuff goes to die is if you don't have that executive layer of understanding of like, hey, this stuff's important. Then if it goes in, if it's like, if you're trading off between the customer and the partner on the product team, it's always going to be the customer that gets the resource. Whereas if you understand, hey, like the way that we get the customer and like retain the customer and grow the customer over time in part is with this like partner motion and strategy, and it's like one strategy, like where I feel like Salesforce, they talk about this a lot in their like at the executive level, like the partners are like basically part of the team. If that's operating at the executive level, then partnership, like all of that partnership stuff can just live with the product team, and then the commercial stuff can live with the commercial team, and the whole thing can function really well. I think like for at the executive level, you kind of need like, you either need a CEO or like a commercial leader who gets that and is like a real advocate for that, like the like partnerships being like a core part of the business strategy, or you need a CPO. Basically, you need like a chief partnerships officer who's not like responsible for the product stuff. Like it doesn't report into them, but they are at the executive level and advocate for that stuff as like a primary piece of the business and strategy. But I agree with you. I think just like operationally, it doesn't make sense to have two fractioned product organizations. You know, like I think that's gonna create even more of an island effect than someone could possibly want.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and like to your point there, which is a really good one around, like Salesforce is a good example. And actually, I think like HubSpot's a really good example as well. Like, Dharmesh kind of from
Yeah,
day one when they set up the company, like if you look at the old version of the HubSpot website from like before they even launched, it had the word like platform on it. So they always had this ambition to be what they are today. But yeah, it's very much, it's not just, a lot of people kind of think of, especially kind of technology platforms or kind of tech, like companies like Shopify, for example, they think that they're a platform because they built a load of technology. Same with Facebook. They think that they got to where they are by building a lot of technology. They kind of didn't. That's kind of on the way by. What they did was they made decisions along the way to change the culture of the company, and that, like, across everything and everyone. And I think if you're going to move into this partnerships world, whether it's technology partnerships or everything else, you kind of have to get the whole company to buy into what you're thinking about, because if you don't, there's going to be misalignment and kind of tension there. Like there's always a bit of tension. Some of it's healthy, but like you get the unhealthy version of tension if you don't clear that up. So yeah, just kind of culturally making sure that the company as a whole understands the value of partnerships and why they're kind of being invested in, and the customer value behind them. And everyone needs to understand that, and ultimately that always has to come from the CEO at the end of the day.
yeah, exactly. I agree with you. Seeing Dharmesh talk and like just the language that he's using, you can tell, hey, like this person gets it. Like there's no gap there. So the right direction for us to go is to talk a little bit about your time at HubSpot. Again, like kind of what a moment in time to be there working on the app store platform for HubSpot again, and like a kind of a meteoric growth there, and continues to be like an incredible marketplace, and I think only growing in importance and influence in the wider marketplace sphere. And like, I'm excited to kind of talk about marketplaces a bit more with you. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about your experience at HubSpot and what you're working on there, and what kind of stood out as being different from your times at Facebook and Intercom.
Yeah, I was kind of lucky again. Like, so I feel like I was lucky to get the Facebook job. I feel like I was lucky to get the Intercom job and every other job I've had, but I was especially lucky to get the HubSpot job. So yeah, when I joined, so I ended up getting to know Scott Brinker from when I was at Intercom. I used to kind of write these, I guess, opinionated blog posts about platform strategy, and he read one of them, and we ended up doing a bit of DMing each other on Twitter, and kind of staying in touch. And yeah, he kind of pinged me, I think in early 2018 or something like that, just saying he was going to hire. I think he'd just joined. He said he was going to hire, for this particular role for the team to take on what was then called the Connect Partner Program. And bit of back and forth later, I ended up joining late 2018, and yeah, it was incredible. It was a really different kind of culture than I'd experienced in the other companies. Like Facebook, like I said, was very much product engineering driven. Intercom was very much design driven, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when I joined HubSpot, I just remember thinking, my God, this is a marketing like machine. It was incredible. Like just the momentum they had, the mind share they had in the community was incredible. And even to be at 150 or so partners, Connect Partner Program partners at that stage, like, was really impressive. But yeah, it was kind of interesting. It was an interesting moment in that HubSpot, I don't know how far they were into the whole CRM journey, but they were kind of evolving beyond the marketing technology
Yeah.
version of themselves into
Yeah.
something bigger. And I think they were still kind of figuring out, like, I think actually I feel like they were starting to grow more confident that they could have this technology ecosystem around HubSpot as well. But there's a few like missing pieces from it. But yeah, it was super interesting to join then. And then the next year was like basically a whirlwind. So basically, I joined late 2018. At Inbound 19, we launched the App Partner Program, I'll talk more about that in a second, kind of where that came from,
Yeah.
and the app marketplace on the same day. So that was a year packed full of, working with the product teams to get the old Connect directory moved into more of an app marketplace model and kind of migrating the partners across. But also redesigning the app partner program was a pretty big undertaking as well. And sort of what we wanted from that was to future proof the program so we could kind of scale it up more efficiently, but also from a customer perspective, make sure we were telling the right story for them as well. So, like for example, like in the year, like around the time I joined, we had a kind of a typical 3 tiers kind of a program, which was really good and got us really far. But from talking to customers and partners alike, like customers didn't really understand what the tiers really meant to them or for them. And then on the other side, I think some of the criteria we had for some partners around the number of installs, for example, to get to each tier, didn't make sense for some of the partners that were, I guess, more enterprise focused, if that makes any sense. So we had one tier that was, you had to have 50 installs or something. And if you were a company that was more focused on enterprise customers and you had 20, you kind of had no path to being certified. So all that kind of came together to what is, I think, still today, I think it's pretty much the same model today, where we just simplified the program, kind of Shopify Atlassian style, brought down the requirement to be listed in the marketplace in terms of like the number of active installs and a few other bits and pieces. And that sort of brought more partners in and opened it up. And then we kind of lowered the install bar for getting certified as well, and to kind of make sure that those partners who built something of value, even if it was super niche, could have the opportunity earlier to validate through like our certification teams the quality of what they've built, and then kind of get more customers from that. But yeah, it was a super interesting year. That 2018, 2019 year, I feel like the whole team did like 3 years of work in like one or something. But it was amazing. And just that moment, actually, Christopher O'Donnell being on the stage, announcing the new marketplace. There was a bunch of great partnerships announced the same day as well. Was fantastic and kind of teed up really nicely the next few years after that. But it was really, really fun, the whole thing.
Yeah, and what I love about you talked about like kind of this transition into the CRM space, and like I think HubSpot is just doing like a fantastic job of growing the scope of what they do over time, and like having a thriving app marketplace and ecosystem is like a really smart way to do that, right? Because you can basically you can gauge customer interest in whatever functionality, tangential functionality that could possibly exist. It's like every possible use case across the like thousands of apps that are in there. It's like, okay, like you basically have thousands of product experiments running right now, and you don't even have to build them. All you have to do is like approve the product someone else has built. And it's like, oh, okay, this one's getting really high adoption. There's a lot of interest from our customers in this space. Like, let's go and like figure out how we add more value or address this persona, and like do the whole thing that, and yeah, it seems outside looking in, it seems like HubSpot's done a really good job of kind of leveraging that, even like with the Clearbit acquisition. Like, Clearbit's obviously like a popular integration. It's like, and so it's like really clear, hey, like this is in the CRM space. It's kind of like a sales slash RevOps tool, which is like, more where they want to go. And it's like lots of people are using it already. It's like very, very smart. And they're using this app marketplace as a way to kind of further that strategy, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, I think they did an incredible job. Like, I actually think the app marketplace today, and even the Connect program before it, kind of wouldn't be the way that it is, or as successful as it is, if it hadn't been for the sort of agency partner program existing in the first instance. Like that, just they've been kind of community building for a long, long time, and actually a lot of the kind of new partners in the app marketplace world are actually agencies. So they're folks that have, been offering services to customers for years and years and years, but are basically productizing some of them now for
Wow.
like these super niche use cases. So they're kind of generating a recurring source of recurring revenue, like software revenue, basically, on top of the service revenue that they've been making anyway. And it's this kind of nice combo. But yeah, I think HubSpot have just built an incredible. They've got so much momentum now, and so much like really good partner relationships overall across all the different programs that yeah, it's teed up nicely for the next 10 years. Like it's gonna be interesting to see with Clearbit, even some of the pricing changes that they've made recently, kind of the effect that that has. But yeah, I'll put it like this: around the time I was joined, I think it was 60,000 customers or something. HubSpot had maybe a bit less. Now it's like 200,000 ish, and it's just that's insane growth.
Yeah.
And yeah, lots more to come.
Yeah, exactly. Just like greenfields, it feels like for them still. There's like so much room. There's so much room between them and Salesforce. That like isn't in the CRM space that just isn't captured by anyone. It's yeah, it's like and as companies continue to adopt technology, it's like it's only gonna there's only more market building for them. It's really fun to kind of watch. Yeah, I've been an investor in HubSpot since they went public, and I'm like a
Oh
big
wow,
fan. I kind of track along with what the company does because I think they're doing great stuff. Same thing with Salesforce. So shifting gears finally, so you decided to get back on the entrepreneurial journey. You're a brave, some might say crazy guy for doing it, but very, very cool. And you're kind of taking this experience that you've had in the kind of like platform and marketplace space and turning it and kind of taking those skills and experience and making that easier for other people to see some of that value as well. And so I'm excited to hear a little bit more about what you're doing with Listed and like what some of those insights, like how you kind of came to building this company based on the insights and experience you'd gathered through that journey that we just talked about.
awesome. Yeah. So again, like was really lucky, at Intercom to experience, listing Intercom, the integrations that we built in like Shopify's marketplace and Atlassian's marketplace and in Microsoft's environments as well. And I'll put it like this: if I didn't already have a relationship with Shopify from when I worked at Facebook, um, getting listed in a marketplace as quickly as we did would have been a lot harder than it was. So that kind of opened my eyes up to just how much work it could be to get listed in marketplaces. The amount of all the different things you've got to pull together, the different assets. You got to pull a bunch of teams together to kind of create the listing content, all this kind of stuff, documentation. So I kind of started to experience that there. And then when I was at HubSpot, sort of one of my jobs at HubSpot was to build like the program team, so the team that onboards partners into the marketplace. So I managed to, during my time there, I managed to look over about 1,000 listings that came into the marketplace. And one of the things I noticed was the partners that really invested in a high quality listing from the get go did really well from it. So like my favorite example still is Org Chart Hub. It's like an org chart mapping tool for HubSpot, like purely built for HubSpot. A perfect example of a customer actually building a solution to their own problem and then realizing other people probably had the same problem too. But their listing is amazing. Like the quality of the content in there is great. They've got a really good explainer video. They have all of their case studies linked from the page. The documentation is linked from it as well. And also they reply to the reviews. So they reply to the reviews, first of all, which a lot of people do not do. Actually, a surprisingly big number of people do not do across most marketplaces. But they also reply to them quickly as well, good or bad. So the perfect example of a really good partner making the most of that listing as a core part of their marketplace go-to-market. Yeah, I think they're one good example of it working out really well. But I saw more and more examples where listings would come through to be kind of half done. There'd be screenshots of like an OAuth screen. There was it was super low quality, and it wasn't because partners didn't want to do it. It just didn't. They just didn't have the time, the tools, to kind of pull it all together. So that was the first thing. Just creating the content was hard for most, but also then if you're a partner and you're listed in, let's say a dozen marketplaces, you've got 10 integrations or 12 integrations and you're listed in all these marketplaces, managing them at scale, just keeping on top of reviews and responding to them in a timely manner. The attribution piece basically doesn't exist across all of these marketplaces. That's a challenge as well. So that's kind of what I'm focused on solving now, just helping to turn all of these app marketplaces that are growing in number all the time into basically a distribution engine for SaaS businesses at a time when it's becoming more and more expensive to acquire customers at a reasonable CAC. So yeah, it's been fun so far. Just kind of trying to productize, I guess, a lot of what I learned at HubSpot from what I saw from a bunch of different partners. And ultimately, I think my hope as well is it's not just good for the partners that want to list in these marketplaces. My hope is that actually the platforms themselves will benefit. So like the customers will have higher quality content to interact with. One thing that most folks don't realize is marketplaces aren't just used by customers to find solutions to their problems. They're actually used by sales teams as well. Like they're actually a source of truth for like the ecosystem. So it's almost like a knowledge base for these teams. And the higher quality content that can be in there, that can be useful for like customers, like I said, but also for those internal teams who are trying to figure out like, they've got a customer on the phone, they're asking them like, do you have an integration for this? How do I install it? How do I use it? All the usual questions. That should all live in marketplace listings. So that's kind of what we want to enable, this kind of three-way sort of good for customers, good for partners, good for the platforms as well kind of scenario.
Yeah, amazing. And when I was at Deal, we had a great marketplace, and like a lot, we would get like 75,000 visits to the marketplace on a monthly basis. It was like one of the most popular parts of our whole product for customers. Then also our internal teams used it because we didn't have an internal directory, right? So it was like our internal one as well. And that's a really astute observation because I'm it makes a ton of sense, right? And that is the case. It's like, hey, if you want to get in front of the sales and success teams or whatever, like you need to be in the marketplace because that's what they're using. But yeah, we generated a ton of leads for our partners through the marketplace, as I mentioned earlier. We also received a massive amount of leads from marketplaces that we were listed in. It was like a really key part of our business to the point that we were like, hey, should we staff a team that just spends all of their time making sure that we're listed on the right marketplaces and maintaining that stuff? Because it was like we get so many leads from all of these different marketplaces, and they convert at a really high rate, and it's a really good business for us. And I think as we were talking about, as efficiency becomes more of a champion in like business operations, this is like a really, really important thing for companies to be looking into. So I'm like over the moon that you're building a solution for this, to be honest, because I think it's going to make a real big difference. And it is something that I think makes sense for partnerships teams to be thinking about. And like, it's almost like a strategic tool in the toolkit for like a VP of partnerships or whoever else to, if their company aren't already thinking about this, that they can kind of bring to the table and they can expand their scope a little bit. Like in some companies, maybe this is something that the marketing team would own, right? Like, but like if you're the VP of partnerships or the head of partnerships in a company, and your company doesn't have a tool like yours at the moment to like manage their marketplace listings and generate leads from that, like I'd be looking into this myself and being like, hey, this is probably a way that I could generate like hundreds of more opportunities through my team, so I'm super excited that you're building something like this. And I think it's if people aren't doing this at their companies already, they should take a good look at what you're doing, because it's a big opportunity for them.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you think so. And I'm a big believer in it. I think it's what people forget is that the hard work is usually building the integration. Like that's usually the hardest thing you should have to do. Getting listed is harder than it should be, just for a bunch of different reasons. Just getting the content created, pulled together, and all that kind of stuff. But the thing I think most folks don't realize is for most marketplaces, it's free to list in them. So like it's literally zero cost to be in that environment, in a super high intent environment as well. Like people are literally looking for solutions to a problem, but also a high trust environment. So if you're on the HubSpot app marketplace, for example, you already trust HubSpot, you enjoy the product, you're going to trust things that are in the marketplace as well. So like I don't know why folks wouldn't want to be in there, but again, I think it's less of they don't want to be in there. It's more of they just don't have the time to manage the stuff at scale. So yeah, it's going to be hopefully a very exciting few years ahead, and hopefully we can kind of turn these app marketplaces into a good distribution channel for folks.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. For folks, as I say, Hugh isn't a sponsor or anything for the show. I have no financial incentive to be promoting what he's doing. I just think that I want partnership people to win. And if you're not doing something like this at the moment, you should be really, and your company isn't doing it already, you should be exploring it, because it could be a real smart way for you to blow out your numbers and generate a bunch of revenue for your company. So you can check listed out at trylisted.com. That's Hugh's product, and I would really recommend people go and check it out and like factor something into your annual planning and annual strategy, because like I say, deal that was like a real massive revenue generator for us, and getting those additional leads really covered our bases when maybe like some of our one-to-one partner relationships weren't performing at the level that we wanted during the economic slowdowns or whatever else. The marketplaces continued to pump leads into our business and like kind of kept things growing and running in the direction that we wanted to. It's like a real lifesaver. So I recommend people checking that out. Well, Hugh, thank you so much for your time. I know we're at time. We're over time. I could have gone on for another 2-3 hours, but I won't, because I don't want to take up more of your time. But just thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me and sharing your experience. I know that this is going to be amazingly valuable to everyone that's listening. So I thank you on their behalf as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, the brown envelope is on its way to you with loads of money in it. Thank you so much.
Awesome.